We are ready to begin the presentation. My name is Elizabeth de Jesus. I am the co-director of the North Florida Clean Fuels Coalition. Welcome to our webinar, Florida Fuel Resilience. This is our third webinar this year. You can watch previous webinars on our webpage, northfloridacleanfuels.com. The North Florida Clean Fuels Coalition began in 2009 and was designated as a Clean Cities Coalition by the Department of Energy in 2016 and most recently in 2022. We are hosted by the North Florida TPO. Our mission is to reduce petroleum consumption by increasing alternative fuels, vehicles, and infrastructure diversity in North Florida. The coalition accomplishes this through outreach, education, and strategic investment. And now I would like to introduce our moderator, James Taylor. He is a member of our consultant team, and he works with RF&H in environment, stewardship, and resiliency.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. As Elizabeth said, my name is James Taylor, and I'm Sustainability and Resilience Specialist at RS&H. We have a long-standing relationship with the North Florida Clean Fuels Coalition, providing technical support to advance alternative fuels in our region. Many of you on the call have likely received emails from me in the past requesting data for our annual Clean Fuel Survey. That survey helps measure progress in our region and is in the top 3 for reducing gas and diesel use per capita in the nation. The survey also helps enable the North Florida Clean Fuels Coalition to continue bringing alternative fuel projects and funding to the region. So keep an eye out for emails because we'll be starting data collection again after the holidays. We also assist the Clean Fuels Coalition with conducting fleet assessments for organizations considering transitioning to alternative fuels. Our goal is to identify cost-effective opportunities and provide quantitative analysis that can aid in budgeting and grant writing. If you're interested in a fleet assessment, please reach out to Marcy or Elizabeth. The topic of today's webinar is Florida fuel resilience, a timely topic especially relevant for Florida, a state frequently impacted by hurricanes. Recent storms, including Hurricane Milton and Hurricane Helene, have had lasting effects on our communities, disrupting transportation networks, fuel supply, and electrical grids. Our thoughts are with the communities who are still recovering from these storms, and in fact, one of our speakers from the city of Cape Canaveral had to cancel because his community is still recovering from Hurricane Milton. This webinar will explore how alternative fuels can enhance resilience and aid in disaster recovery. The North Florida Clean Fuels Coalition is fuel neutral and acknowledges a variety of alternative fuels are required to meet the need of consumers, businesses, and government organizations. In that light, this webinar reflects that commitment and will highlight advantages and disadvantages of a variety of alternative fuels. Today's webinar will feature presentations from 2 speakers, followed by a Q&A session. While we're going to wait until the end for the questions and answers, you can enter your questions anytime into the chat and we'll be monitoring throughout. So please keep the questions coming while our speakers present. Our first speaker is Alex Kolpakov, Director of Tampa Bay Clean Cities and Research Associate at the University of South Florida Center for Urban Transportation Research. Alex manages transportation-related research projects, including several studies focused on the role of alternative fuels in enhancing resilience. Our second speaker is Matt Meyer from Dannar. Dannar develops innovative all-electric utility vehicles that emphasize versatility and sustainability. Their heavy-duty off-road platforms are designed for various applications, including to transport and export power for increased energy resiliency. So let's welcome our first speaker, Alex, and we'll get started.
Thank you for the introduction, James, and good afternoon, everyone. Let me share my screen. All right, can everybody see my screen? All right. So resilience is typically approached through a 5-pronged approach that usually includes redundancy, storage, access, resupply, and efficiency. Well, redundancy is about having multiple fuels, different modes, routes on multi-purpose vehicle. Storage is about having adequate fuel storage nearby that can be used when the fuel supply is cut off. Access is about making sure that you can access that stored fuel when you need it. Resupply, obviously, you need to ensure that that fuel storage is resupplied as soon as possible after the disaster. And efficiency is when there is a shortage of fuel, you need to make sure that you maximize the either passenger or cargo per vehicle and maximize miles per gallon. So essentially, you try to use the fuel in the most efficient way when it's in short supply. Now, this is a graphic representation of fuel supply chain for different types of fuel from production to the end user. So for example, for petroleum fuels, oil is extracted out of the well, then it's sent through a pipeline to a refinery, then it goes through a port on a tanker ship, then it's loaded into a pipeline or stored at a terminal at the port, and it's then delivered to retail stations by tanker trucks. So you can see that there are other types of fuels that can take different, sometimes much shorter delivery routes. Now, to expand a little bit about the different fuel types having different delivery methods, specifically in the case of Florida, all petroleum fuels, gasoline and diesel that comes to Florida is delivered to the state through Florida ports. Natural gas, on the other hand, is transported through a pipeline that can run above or underground. So one example is a Gulf Stream natural gas pipeline that runs under the Gulf of Mexico to supply Florida with natural gas from Alabama and Mississippi. So natural gas supply chain is relatively free of choke points due to some redundancy in the system and due to the fact that it's not reliant on the port infrastructure. So there are usually multiple compressors that service the pipeline. In most cases, it's up to 4 compressors. So even the loss of one compressor will not reduce the fuel dramatically. It can only reduce the supply by about 25%. Now, if you look at propane, propane is delivered to Florida by rail. It comes from usually Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Ohio. So one thing that makes propane unique and favorable emergency fuel is that it can be stored indefinitely. So unlike diesel and gasoline, it does not degrade when you store it. So with diesel and gas, you always have to turn it around, otherwise it goes bad. And propane tanks can be filled and stored for a very long time with little or no maintenance, and you can use it whenever you need it. Now, similar to compressed natural gas, propane allows for mobile fueling, so you can bring fuel to the fleets or vehicles that need it. Biofuels, another type of alternative fuel, is usually delivered to Florida by rail as well. And there is also a biodiesel production facility in South Florida, so it's locally produced. And electricity is mainly produced from natural gas, coal, or nuclear in Florida. There's not much hydropower, or there's not much wind generation, a little bit of solar, but not significant. And both production and distribution of electricity are vulnerable to hurricanes. Now, in this presentation, I'll mention some of the findings from the previous studies related to fuel resilience that Tampa Bay Clean Cities Coalition and Qatar was involved in. One was Tampa Resilience Study that was completed in 2020, and we looked at the role that alternative fuels can play in improving the resilience in the Tampa Bay area. So the goal was to collect and report data on fuel management and resilience activities related to disaster planning in Tampa Bay, investigate best practices and case studies of using alternative fuels, evaluate some vulnerabilities of critical facilities, and also identify the areas of improvement. So the way we approached it, we relied on multiple sources of data collection. We've interviewed public and private fleets in the area regarding their resilience practices. We conducted some site visits and also collected data on fuel shortage during Hurricane Irma, which was in 2017, and also the data on power outages during that hurricane from the local utility company. So here are some of the major findings and best practices that we found from Tampa Bay. One is that ports can be choke points during hurricanes, particularly the Port of Tampa Bay is really vulnerable. That results from the whole configuration of the port and the waterways that lead to it. There is a 43-mile channel that leads to the port, and it requires approximately 4 hours for the ships to cover the distance. So that channel is relatively narrow and can accommodate only one-way traffic for mid-sized or large cargo ships. So due to the complexity of that port channel, large cargo ships are guided through the channel by local pilots. And in case of a poor weather, whether the hurricane is approaching or you have other high waves or just foggy, pilots suspend the service and ships are not able to enter or exit the port. And the reason why the port of Tampa is significant is because approximately 45% of all Florida gasoline comes through Port Tampa Bay. Now, the second finding is that timing is critical to determine when normal operations should be suspended to prepare the fleet for hurricane impact. And this planning should be done every year to ensure coordination with local and state emergency guidelines. Now, asset staging, which essentially is relocating vehicles to higher elevation areas pre-landfall, is a key step in hurricane preparedness, and we found out that a lot of critical fleets are doing that. High water capable vehicles are sometimes required for recovery operations, but also debris removal is an important first step after the hurricane to clear the roads. And we've found out that some fleets are actually getting very creative with this. We've seen the case where one local municipality in Tampa Bay purchased snow plows, which they use to remove debris from major roads after the hurricanes. Fleets that we've interviewed employ a variety of strategies to improve the resilience. They maintain their own fuel storage, and the amount will vary certainly depending on the fleet, but ideally it should be enough fuel to maintain operations anywhere from 7 to 14 days. The contingency fuel supply and options for securing fuel. It's always nice to have alternative supplier in case of unexpected issues with the main supplier. Employing fuel prioritization strategies to allocate resources is the most efficient way, or you can do some fleets choose to prioritize fuel by vehicle. Sometimes they ration of fuel per task, but these are some of the things that we've noticed were implemented by some of the fleets. Diversity in fuel supply. It talks about using alternative fuels. This may include using either alternative fuel supply channels, such as receiving fuels from different geographic areas or by different delivery method, or it can also be investing in alternative fuel vehicles or alternative fuel power generators. Now, implementing effective communication and resource sharing procedures that would allow fleets to share fuel and other critical resources. What we found out is that fleets usually contact each other over the phone in case they need anything. So they do talk to each other, to their peers, but implementing a more robust system that would allow tracking resources availability in real time, maybe through an online tool or some sort of other web resource for sharing them would be beneficial for the community. Now, investing in emergency generators, including the generators that are powered by alternative fuels, is another important strategy. And finally, one thing that we've noticed is that accurately predicting the fuel burn rate under emergency operations is challenging. It turns out that fleets can consume up to 2 to 3 times more fuel during emergency operations than the normal operations, and it's important to be able to actually best determine that fuel burn rate as accurately as possible. And sometimes it's not very easy. Now, here are some of the results of data analysis regarding fuel shortages during Hurricane Irma in 2017 that we've done. The graph on the left shows the results of panic buying before hurricane. You can see that 80% of stations were out of gas and 55% of stations were out of diesel 2 to 3 days even before the hurricane hit the state. We saw a similar situation before Hurricane Milton. In fact, about a day before the hurricane, most of the stations in Tampa Bay were out of gas, so it was not possible to purchase any gas. After the Hurricane Irma, half of Tampa Bay gas stations did not have fuel, and what we've also noticed that diesel was more available before and during the hurricane compared to gasoline. But at the same time, after the hurricane landfall, diesel availability dropped significantly. Well, not clear exactly what caused that. There could be two possibilities. One is that diesel could be the fuel of choice for recovery, so that's why it was in high demand right after the hurricane, or that maybe diesel supply was compromised. Again, we don't have enough data to determine what caused that. The graph on the right shows the combination of fuel availability and power, because you need power to dispense fuel. And there is one interesting thing that there is about 5 to 10% of stations had gas, but there was no power to dispense fuel. So essentially, whatever that they had gas, it was useless because they could not use it. So this emphasizes the importance of having both fuel and power to ensure uninterrupted fueling. Now, power outages create significant challenges for transit agencies with large battery electric buses. So while that large battery that is on the bus can be used to provide exportable power, and there are such technologies that allow that, the inability to charge the bus for a long time can result in stranded asset, and that can be a problem. Backup generators usually are not capable of supporting the practical charging of battery electric buses. It can help with charging the diesel buses, but not the battery electric ones. Solar power, it's a possibility to have as a backup, but it usually requires very large footprint and is often not independent of the grid. So if the grid is down, solar often cannot supply power directly to the customer. There are exceptions to that, and I'll talk about that a little later. Some of the potential solutions to overcome those challenges is have fuel diversification, have different types of vehicles, electric, diesel, CNG, hybrid buses. Then one other thing that we've noticed that some customers had multiple connections to the grid, or they would be located on different circuits. So this may not be feasible for smaller customers, but we've seen cases for some larger customers like transit agencies where their transit facility would be wired by 2 or more circuits. So if one circuit is down, only part of the campus is out of power. In fact, I believe that JTA facility in Jacksonville is powered exactly the same way. They are on 2 circuits. Battery storage is another solution, but it could be very expensive, sometimes prohibitively for large fleets. And then hardening of electrical infrastructure by utility, essentially putting the electrical cables and all the infrastructure underground is really useful, and obviously faster restoration of service by utility company is a great approach. Obviously, utility company plays a vital role in resilience, so you cannot achieve resilience without partnership and active participation from utility companies. Now, building on the experience with resilience at the local level, that we've partnered with the Florida Energy Office, National Renewable Energy Lab, as well as the University of Central Florida in developing a state resilience plan. So the primary goal was to integrate alternative fuels into resilience planning practices in the state to improve states' preparedness for hurricanes and other natural disasters. So this project was completed and published by NREL in December of 2022. So I'm going to go over quickly some of the findings. So some of the lessons learned is that the propane and CNG supplies were not interrupted during past hurricanes, unlike diesel and gasoline. And while diesel and gasoline was not available from the ports due to port closures, propane and CNG remained available. We've seen cases where propane buses were involved in recovery efforts. They were delivering supplies and helping with evacuations. Some of the CNG users, such as City Furniture, sent their CNG vehicles to help with cleanups after hurricane and provided also compressed natural gas to local municipalities that needed it. So that's the case of where the alternative fuel helped with recovery right after the hurricane. One other thing that we would like to emphasize is that the need to educate the first responders about alternative fuel vehicles and how to handle them. There was one example in Broward County, which was not necessarily related to hurricane, but still emphasizes that need for educating the first responders, is where the propane bus caught fire due to electrical issue. and the bus was parked in the bus yard. The fire department was on the scene very fast, but since it was propane bus, the first responders did not know how to handle it, so they let it burn to the ground. Fleets, especially the public fleets, regularly share fuel during hurricane events. This includes both conventional and alternative fuels. We've seen those cases. But requests to share fuel are usually handled by Emergency Operations Center, and collectively managing scarce resources such as fuel is vital for improving resilience at the system level. So maybe developing some better methods how to share and communicate that availability of fuel that other potential fleets have that can be shared is going to be very helpful. Redundancy in fueling infrastructure is very important. CNG fleets often prefer to have 2 or more compressors at the CNG station to ensure uninterrupted operation. Another example of redundancy is on-site fueling that can be used as a backup option. For example, again, City Furniture in Southeast Florida has its own CNG station on site, but they also have an agreement with TrueStar to deliver CNG on site in case the fueling station is completely down, which never happened in the past, but it's always handy to have that backup in case something happens to the station. Alternative fuel generators can be very useful in case of a disaster. So this is particularly relevant to fleets that have natural gas fueling stations, because if they have access to natural gas pipeline, they will be able to continue operation without having power. Priority service for wireless communications is vital in emergencies. So essential fleets often use satellite phones to communicate during emergencies, and the phones usually have wireless priority service, which is available for government agencies. So it allows to push the caller to the front of the line when all circuits are busy. So this is a must during emergencies for some critical fleets. And finally, standing water can present significant challenges to vehicles, both conventional and alternative fuel vehicles. There are some off-road electric vehicles that are specifically designed to be used in standing water, such as Dannar, and Matt is going to talk about that a little later. But aside from that, regular electric vehicles can be as vulnerable to standing water as other vehicles. So in general, the ability of vehicles to go through high standing water, it depends on how high the vehicle air intake and vents are located, and or how high the traction motors or batteries are located if in the case of electric vehicles. But some vehicles are better than others. One of the issues during the emergencies is to ensure that there is enough fuel along the route when you want to ensure that the evacuation is available. So there were multiple cases in the past when vehicles stuck in traffic during evacuation ran out of fuel, gasoline or diesel. But evacuation may be an essentially difficult task for EVs given the limited range of the vehicles and fewer charging locations than gasoline, and also longer refueling time. So as part of the Florida statewide resilience project, USF developed and tested the EV evacuation planning web tool. The goal was to assist the developing an optimal evacuation plan for EVs to avoid the charging congestion. So in that tool, the user provides the initial range or state of charge of the vehicle, also provides the battery size, origin and destination, and preferred departure window. And the backend algorithm determines what time to start the trip, what route to take, and where to charge on the way. So that algorithm attempts to balance the EV charging demand and also supply by reserving of charging time and also the EV charging capacity on the way throughout the evacuation route. So this is a prototype tool to demonstrate the feasibility of optimally scheduling long-distance EV evacuation in the case of an emergency. And it was based on multiple assumptions, of course, but the idea was to demonstrate that it's feasible to do. Finally, I want to finish with some of the highlights from one of the recent hurricanes, Hurricane Ian, which was in 2022. That was the last one that we have complete data on. During that hurricane, the natural gas infrastructure in Florida was not compromised. There was little interruption to a natural gas pipeline, but interestingly, even we've noticed that there were a lot of flooding in some of the areas, but even some of the facilities that were flooded, the natural gas continued operating there. There was a case in Fort Myers where one of the facility got flooded, but the CNG meters continued operating, even being fully submerged in water. While natural gas supply was not compromised during Hurricane Ian, natural gas demand fell significantly. And natural gas is mainly used for power generation in Florida, not as transportation fuel. So more than 2 million electric customers faced blackouts after Ian. And as a result, natural gas generation in Florida fell by almost 42%. So and that caused the decrease in natural gas demand. Most damage during Ian occurred due to flooding, not wind. And the Carfax estimated that over 350,000 cars were damaged by Ian, mostly by flooding. There were 21 notable cases of EV battery fires in the aftermath of Ian, which I'm sure a lot of you heard in the national news. There was one case when flooded EV caught fire in the garage and burned down the house. In fact, there was a similar case in Tampa after the recent Hurricane Helene. So exactly the same, where the electric vehicle caught fire in the house and caused the fire to the house. Solar really stood out during this past hurricane. So there's a community called Babcock Ranch in Southwest Florida, which was all over the news after Hurricane Ian. It was directly hit by the storm, but did not lose power due to the 150 megawatt solar array that they have. And they also have a 10 megawatt battery storage that helps that solar array to operate. That solar array did not sustain significant damage. They lost a few panels, but mostly continued operating, powering the community while the entire Fort Myers area had no power. Well, a big part of that is that the big reason for that is that that solar array, the way it's wired, it supplies power directly to the community, and only what is in excess of demand is fed into the grid. It's not always it was not always that way. Initially, it was powered to feed the power straight into the grid, and during the previous hurricanes before Ian, the community did lose power because the grid was down. So also, the electric utility did a good job hardening their grid prior to the hurricane. They buried a lot of wiring and other infrastructure underground, making it more resilient to storms. So this was the big reason why that solar array, as impressive as it is, was able to continue providing power to Babcock Ranch during Hurricane Milton. And actually, during Hurricane Milton, that was just earlier this month, Babcock Ranch also did not lose power, while over 3 million residents in Florida were without power for days. So you have to keep in mind that you have to have a smart infrastructure, not just having a solar array, but you have to think a step ahead. What's going to happen if the grid is down? So with that, I'll stop and turn it over to Matt.
Thank you, Alex. That was great. I have some questions, so if we're going to hold for the questions, but that gave me a lot of questions. And if anybody else has questions, be sure to put them in the chat while Matt gets started here. And once he wraps up, we'll do our Q&A.
All right, very good. I'm going to grab the screen here, see if we can get this right, and we will. All right, are you seeing just one slide there?
Yep, looks good.
All right, very good. In fact, I'm just going to unplug. That can do an old guy more harm than good. So I appreciate the chance to be here. Whoops, I apologize. I was zipping through that. There we go. All right, so Matt with Dannar, I appreciate the chance to be here. My presentation will be a little more general, but we're going to end, and in fact, we'll zip through it to get to the end and talk about emergency response specifically with regard to energy storage. Alex kind of touched on some of this already, which is great. I think these two conversations will go well together. And really what I want to do is try to make a case for adding mobility to energy storage. When I think of resiliency, I kind of think of it in two ways. I think of it as just emergency preparedness, right? So a good planning makes for a more prepared response. So prepared, so resiliency equals prepared. But I also think of it as just getting free from poles and wires and some of the traditional ways to move power around. And so in that case, resiliency equals independence. And I think they both are important, and they both will certainly play when we talk about response to a hurricane. As kind of our conversation is kind of a centerpiece today. Just a quick snapshot of where the energy storage market is. And we all know this is a big market. It's a growing market, but when you see it displayed like this, I think it really can help us understand just what this market is. And this is the energy storage market really is a derivative to this alternative energy buildup that we've been already in the midst of. And energy storage is kind of a trailing figure and market that is in response to all of the needs that come from these alternative energies. So again, we talk about resiliency as both preparedness and independence, and I want to kind of make this idea sticky. I wanted to make it a little bit fun. So I want us first to just recognize that we are using mobility when it comes to storage already in a lot of different ways. A couple of examples here. I could have used a dozen more, but it kind of helps capture the idea that storing energy makes sense for a lot of the same reasons that we do other things. So let me tell you a quick story. When I was a young man, I was living in the Midwest in Illinois, and if a storm was coming in, we would take steps to be prepared for that storm, right? It was my mom's resilient response to news that a storm was inbound. And I knew it was going to be a big storm, a bad storm, if my mom would say, "Hey, Matt, go fill the bathtub with water and unplug the TV." You know, it's things we did in order to weather a storm or to be prepared if we lost power. Similarly, though, in terms of the mobility piece of that, if we were going to travel to her family in Ohio, she would give me a couple of empty jugs. She said, "Hey, go fill these with water and grab a box of graham crackers, right? We're going to put those in the trunk." And that was to mitigate our risk when we traveled. We didn't have cell phones, and we were in our 64 Oldsmobile. And so that was a way that we added resiliency and we mitigated risk to our travel. But sometimes we just want to add mobility because we want the freedom. We want to be independent, and so we can certainly store our beer in kegs like our friend here. I love this picture, and the reason I chose it is because just seeing how enthusiastic this woman is about her energy storage or beer storage in this case, I think we ought to consider having her speak at a webinar. But sometimes there are good reasons why we want to be able to take that beverage with us, right? And give us the independence and freedom to enjoy that where we want to enjoy it. And so again, for some of the same reasons and for the reason of trying to catch this idea and make it sticky, I want to recognize that energy storage is a big and important market, and adding mobility to that certainly has value. It's certainly going to have value when we're talking about planned events. And we'll look at that a little bit more, and unplanned emergency response, and that's where we'll kind of find ourselves at the end. And then specific to really the conversation today, there is this charging element, and Alex kind of touched on it there at the end when he was talking about the studies that have gone into what do we do for evacuation routes and getting people safely out of affected or soon to be affected zones by a big storm. Especially as the number of EVs on the road continues to grow. So again, what I want you to catch here is simply that adding mobility to energy storage is going to help us mitigate risk. We're going to be able to concentrate power. Again, we'll get to that when we're talking about emergency response. And then as the world is looking to microgrids as the answer for generating power locally, using it locally, storing it locally, those solutions become become more and more useful when we can add some flexibility and adaptability to that. Again, I don't want this to be a big commercial about my specific piece of equipment, our mobile power station, but just as a snapshot, this is what we're doing from a power distribution, 122 40 volt, 43 phase. Today we're storing up to 0.5 megawatt on board. And in fact, we're taking orders already for 2025. That will be 600, maybe 800 kilowatt hours on board in the fall, moving us towards kind of the holy grail of getting 1 megawatt of power on wheels, which is where we're headed. We'll pair nicely with renewables. We'll talk about that a little bit more. I wanted you to see capture the picture there in the top right corner. That's a hydrogen fuel cell on the rear deck of the MPS as a range extender. So again, kind of pairing these new solutions together, or you think about hydrogen as being that good stored energy, and then the MPS in this case becomes the way we can hybrid that to the universal need for electricity. So some of the features there. So again, we'll talk about the planned, and then we'll end with just the slide about our unplanned and where we kind of fit there with emergency response. But I want to start here because it will kind of set up where we're going, and just think about all the ways and all the times where we're having stored energy for planned reasons, be it an event, be it down at the beach, or you're powering lights and a stage and a sound system. Or another good example, Volvo just invited us out to their Volvo Days, their construction division up in Shippensburg, Pennsylvania. They were all of their customers and their big dealers in, and they're showing off their new electrics. And we were there to charge their electrics as they were going through their demos through the week, not just to provide them power and keep them operational, but Volvo has recognized us as an effective partner for their big construction contractors to use to keep their new electrics operational in the field. So those are just some ways that we're seeing markets kind of blossom up for us in these areas for planned power needs. And again, I won't park here, but think about all the ways with electric fleets and like a port operations that's moving to electric for material handling, how having a mobile asset to bring charging up and down the port would have tremendous value. So just for week in, week out, kind of mundane, regular work, a lot of reasons why all of these new alternative energy solutions, bringing storage and mobile storage with those is going to have value. So then we get to kind of the emergency response, and we talk about the value of being able to deliver energy where it's required. So it's great to have a big solar array like Alex was showing us there, and he talked about the 10 megawatt array there and the battery storage system that's with that. But if a percentage of that storage is in mobile assets, well, now they can be deployed and marshaled up and delivered where they're going to be most needed, regardless of where that is in the state, right? So I envision a scenario which, let's fast forward, 2 or 3 years from now, and I've got, let's say, just a couple of dozen mobile power stations working in and around Florida, and they're just doing regular remote work, power work, with utilities, municipalities, with construction companies, with ports and airports, maybe the state DOT. But then if a hurricane is inbound, those assets can be marshaled up and brought to bear on the problem. So now all of a sudden you can bring an additional 10 or 15 megawatts of power, concentrate that power and deliver that power where it's most needed. For example, in those evacuation routes to augment the charging that's required for all those who are driving EVs and need to get out of an affected area. So the NEVI programs and those things have put charging on those interstates, but those are not prepared to handle the volume of traffic when you got 5 lanes and they're all outbound and people are trying to get out of a situation. So And then once the area is clear and the storm passes, are those same assets with being charged back up could go into an affected zone and clear debris. You see and again, I'm not going to talk really about it today, but in that picture at the top, work arms in a bucket, so you could put a winch on there to clear debris and help in an affected zone, or you simply are bringing those assets down there to provide power for lighting, for communications networks, for shelters, or wherever it is that you're going to require electricity for. In fact, one of our projects that I've got noted down there at the bottom, we're working with the Navy, and the Marines wanted a solution to be able to have their broadband network be able to drop to anywhere in the world and powered. And the solution they came up with was Amazon Web Systems, their mobile broadband network on our mobile power station. And we've done testing and with that, and we can provide that network for the Marines for like 7 weeks without a charge to keep that operational with our current system. So, and then you can power our units back up, and then they can provide additional charging then as folks are coming back in. And so the conversation I'm looking forward to getting to with, for example, like the state of Florida is, and Alex kind of mentioned this, right? Battery storage is costly. So is there an opportunity where we could work with the state and they could provide a grant program, a rebate program where assets like the mobile power station could be purchased, could be used by ports and airports and utilities and construction companies for their regular use, but then the reason of giving that grant or discount is that when a storm's coming in, those can be marshaled up by the state or by FEMA or whomever is responsible and brought to bear to bring solutions. So that's kind of where we see that going, and we're looking forward to getting to that day. In specific to a couple of things, Alex, as I close here, Alex mentioned gas stations that had fuel, but they didn't have electricity to power the gas station. So there's an example where you could roll up a mobile power station. Kind of the bottom right picture is a good visual for that. Plug in 3-phase power, plug it right into the grid, to the building. Anything that's set for for genset power we could power that gas station for fueling purposes. And mentioned already that these also could be outfitted with fast chargers for additional charging. Alex mentioned also the ability for us to get through water. So the picture down there, we can go up to kind of again where those inputs are on our distribution panel. So that's about 3.5, close to 4 feet of water. Everything up under that is sealed. So that is the end of my show. That's kind of our base vehicle, and then with half battery, if you want to use some of still have an open deck for work arms or whatever, or if you want to go full battery storage, that's kind of what it looks like. And again, we're looking forward to in the coming months rolling out some new upgraded solutions that will have even more storage on board. So unless somebody wants me to go back to a picture, I'm going to stop sharing that screen.
Thanks, Matt. That's great. And this was all new to me when I first was introduced to you, and I was extremely impressed. So I'm going to assume some of the people on the call are equally impressed with some of the equipment Dannar's developing and the uses for that equipment. So I'll go ahead and kick off some questions, but as we see in the chat, now is the time to ask questions. So feel free to start adding them, but I'll start by just kind of asking a broad question. Maybe we could start with you, Matt, and then go to Alex. But which sectors, such as government, local versus state, DOTs, airports, private sector, what areas and sectors have you seen the most significant adoption of alternative fuels? And then in your opinion, which sectors offer the greatest opportunity for future growth?
So I can start, and again, I'm speaking specifically to what our vehicle and our lineup is kind of designed to solve, and the solutions we're bringing. So the markets where we're seeing significant for us would be the construction market, because Deere and Caterpillar and some of those are now Volvo, as I mentioned, they're starting to introduce their new electrics, and so those on the work sites are saying, okay, well, that's great. So how do we stay operational? We need to have power available in order to keep these operating. And talking about places that don't have poles and wires and in a panel in the corner of the field with three-phase power, and never will, or at least not until the project is done. So those are kind of areas where we're seeing. I'll tell you another quick one that I'm actually working in conversations with Elizabeth and Alicia from Miami there on, and that is that's kind of relevant to this conversation. Solutions for Puerto Rico, where our mobile assets are kind of paired with mobile solar. So again, they can be deployed wherever it makes sense to be used locally, and whether it's small villages up in the mountains or at a place where you need some additional power. But then again, if a storm's coming in, they can be closed up, battened down, and put in a safe place until the storm passes, but then deployed very quickly. So those become pretty effective. Then certainly Department of Defense is big for us right now for, I guess, some obvious reasons. Yeah. You saw the picture of the drone there. I didn't mention it, but as a drone platform, again, particularly with Uncle Sam, but some commercial applications starting to emerge as well. But that's certainly a big one. So we can charge, and then they could take our unit. Envision like Afghanistan type of an area where you could send our unit by autonomously up into the mountains, 15 miles away, and then you could be running drones. They could land there, charge up, get new coordinates, and then take off again. Kind of functions as an aircraft carrier for the drones then in a remote place. So it's kind of a cool application.
From what I've seen, I think the biggest adoption so far was from the local governments and some critical fleets such as transit, because they do have to provide critical services to citizens. So that's the area that I've seen. But I also noticed that there is a big interest from the private industry as well, and obviously ports and the airports have been really active recently in implementing some of those interesting solutions because, again, these are all critical facilities. They have to stay in business. They have to restore their operations as soon as possible after the storm or any other disaster. So yes, they want to have different options that they have. So that this would be my observations. But I do like the suggestion by Matt that maybe get the state involved, because some of the other states, they do mandates for local governments to implement certain alternative fuel technologies. So in a sense, it's easier for some of those fleets, because they, in a sense, don't have a choice. They have to purchase certain specific technologies. In Florida, it's not the same way. So sometimes it could be a little challenging. So I wouldn't advocate for any specific mandates, but I think a little help from the state certainly would be helpful.
Hey, James, one other quick one I thought of that might have may pertain to Florida as well, but like a Pacific Northwest, there's a lot of movement among the smaller regional airports to be kind of energy hubs for their smaller towns or cities, because a lot of space for solar, and they're generating a lot of hydrogen out there, and then having that be kind of a converting those into energy hubs again, so they can be used regularly and on a kind of day in and day out basis. But then that becomes kind of a hub for emergency response and for staging vehicles and for collecting and storing energy in order to have kind of a home base for emergency response.
That's a great addition there, and actually kind of dovetails in a lot of what you both said, dovetails into some of the other questions, but I think I'll follow up that with, and it doesn't have to be Florida specific if you have other examples. I think it's good to learn from other places. But how do you see alternative fuel challenges and opportunities differing between rural and urban areas, particularly in terms of resilience? And I think, Matt, you adding the idea of these energy hubs is a great start to that. Is there any other differences you've seen or implementation of your products in rural versus urban settings?
Well, Alex, one thing that comes to mind was you and I have talked a little about some of the NEVI programs and where some of the charging is being put. So James, when I think of your question, you think about all the data that would be available as, let's say, Alex and his team are trying to make recommendations on fixed charging for NEVI spend along a highway corridor. Well, in an urban area, there's just tremendous amount of data, right? The number of EVs out there and what interchanges are the most busy, et cetera, and where are the population bases, and where's maybe the commercial transportation hubs. But when you get out to a more rural area, there's less data, there's less demand, there are fewer EV vehicles, and sometimes it's in those rural areas where with some of the mobility value goes up actually, because you might have just a handful of assets that you're trying to cover a couple of counties with versus having a dozen fast chargers at one interchange off the interstate because it's so busy.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the biggest challenge for some of the fixed charging, especially the one that's under NEVI, the DC fast charging, is that you need to have a lot of customers to actually justify this investment. So you can do that, but in many cases, this is all if you have a certain event that can increase demand dramatically, but that demand is temporary. So it would not justify to have a permanent infrastructure there. It just it's not going to be cost effective at all.
Right.
So maybe with that mobility, you can increase that capacity in order to meet that demand for a certain period of time, but then you can move it somewhere else when it's not needed. And again, with high density in urban environment, it's easier to install infrastructure and make sure it's cost effective as opposed to the rural areas where it really is challenging.
Right. Yeah. So James, here's a great example of just what Alex was talking about. I was another airport example, as a matter of fact. I was in Athens, Georgia, talking to the little regional airport out there and kind of showing them what we do and whatever. And where his eyes really lit up is he was thinking, wow, he's like, I've got 8 times a year where my airplane traffic here is 20 times my average week. And that's for Georgia home football games, graduation weekend, right? And so there's an example where you have it's a little more rural, it's a little more spread out, but there are just a handful of times a year where your need is greater. Your need is greater for energy. It's greater for electric vehicle charging. And so again, having some ways to flex that up when you're planned even that's where I see that kind of rural versus urban. Down in Atlanta they can plan for that, but out in Athens they're like, I don't know if we're going to spend that much just so we have all of this in place for these 8 times a year we need it.
Great examples. So kind of building on this theme of obstacles, and then maybe we'll get to some more hopeful positive topics, but what other common obstacles outside of funding, because we'll have a question about funding, have you observed organizations facing when adopting alternative fuels? And if you have any examples of how they overcame those challenges, those would be great to share as well. And neither of you, feel free to jump in.
I'll tee it up for Alex because he mentioned it in his conversation when it comes to training for emergency services, but also training for just technicians and for enough people that are able to work on alternative energy vehicles, powered vehicles, and then in dealing with the challenges that come with all of a sudden, okay, now we got a storm. Okay, is it okay if can I go to this EV charger if there's 6 inches of water around it? Those kinds of education, training, and just trying to get over some of those barriers.
Yeah, training and education, both the public as well as the like Matt mentioned, technicians and people that gonna operate that equipment. I think that is critical because I mean, even with the simple uh, charging of electric vehicle, there are still lots of people that are concerned. Can I even plug in my car when it's raining? So I mean,
Mhm.
am I get
Right.
electrocuted? So
Yep.
simple things like that. I mean, there are lots of myths there that people still believe in. And again, it's not because they're bad people. It's just you have to be able to educate people about the technology, and they have to feel comfortable about using that. And that's one example. The example was about the electric, but it's the same about all kinds of alternative or any new technology, not necessarily alternative technology. So it's not limited just to electric. It's you can see that for anything that's new. So yeah, that's there's a big need for that for education for sure.
Yep.
Excellent. I think we have time for maybe two more here. One I want to maybe pose to Alex, but Matt, if you have something, you can certainly come in and add to it. I was particularly interested in some of the findings around CNG and propane, and I was wondering if, um, following your study or following some of these recent disasters, has there been more widespread adoption of some of these fuels, particularly maybe in emergency power generation, or are you seeing any kind of movement towards that direction?
Uh, I can start in terms of the uh, backup generators. Yes, we've seen a lot of interest in alternative fuel generators, especially compressed natural gas and propane. In terms of the vehicles themselves, there are still some challenges. It seems like there's a lot of focus towards electrification recently, and again, there's nothing wrong with certain technologies, but lots of fleets feel that most of the funding, the government funding, all the rebates, they all go towards one fuel. So sometimes they feel concerned
Mm,
if they have to invest in some other technology that's not as heavily supported as electric, because they feel like it may be abandoned at some point. So I see that is a challenge. You know, some fleet or even some fleets that have invested in compressed natural gas in the past feel like this technology is eventually going to go out of favor, and then they will not be able to purchase vehicles in the future because everything will going to go electric. So I think that's one of the trends that I've seen.
James, I saw that Lee had a comment, I think, on CNG, so I didn't want to miss that.
yeah, I'm
Yeah.
not. Oh, go ahead, Lee. You're
Okay.
on.
Yeah. Several years ago, I funded two CNG stations, large ones, two taxi companies, and then when I was a coordinator of Greater Haven Clean Cities, and then we also upgraded them. But one of the things we did, and this was working with clean energy, was up in Connecticut, and these were for outages either due to like Sandy hit while we were up there, or in the winter when we lost power due to icing conditions and the power lines went down. But what we did is with them is they had backup generators that would run off the natural gas coming out of the pipe that fueled the fueling station. So when we lost the grid, they would hook it up and start the generator up, and those compressors are 200 horsepower, three-phase compressors, so they need a lot of power. So we had two at each of the sites, two compressors. So we would continue to pump natural gas for the vehicles by doing it this way. And then all these sites that Clean Energy had also had the hookups on their site so they could move this generator from one site to the other. And that's still in play up there.
Excellent. Thank you, Lee. I don't know if anyone had any final comments on that, but with that, I think we'll have to wrap up because it's 1 o'clock. So just want to thank both of our speakers and everyone for joining, and we'll see you at the next webinar.
Thanks, James. Appreciate it.